Some pundits say the full economic damage caused by COVID-19 and the lockdown is uncertain, though it will take several months and even years to have a clear picture of where the damage has occurred and how severe it really is. Well, the magnitudes are uncertain. It is certain that we will see a sharp decline in incomes, rising unemployment and widespread businesses. So to speak more about this is Busi Sibeko, who is a researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. A very good evening to you. And thank you so much for speaking to us. So as we mentioned, all of these have been very palpable. The jobs bloodbath, we've seen a decline in key strategic industries. But to your mind, what exactly should we be looking at if we're saying we are moving down an alert level in order to bolster the economy? What are the key areas we should be focusing on at this point?
Thank you for having me. I think the most important thing is that there needs to be a fair share of the burden of the economy. So we need to think about how are different people going to be impacted by the reopening of the economy, depending on their sectors and their intersecting identities, right? For instance, so the reopening of the economy and how schools are still closed or some children can't go back to school. How does that work when parents have to be at work and children are at home? So we need to think differently about how our policies are coordinated to ensure that there is a fair share of burden in terms of reopening the economy.
I want to talk about the labour market. We obviously need to keep a close eye on all aspects of it, from the policy responses to support those most in need. When lockdown was initially announced, though, there appeared to be this in mind, that that's what government is trying to do to cushion the blow for most South Africans. But has it really worked out that way?
I mean, it's been quite, I don't really have the words to describe what's happening right now, but we do know that many people have lost their jobs. We know that 3 million people have lost their jobs according to NeedsCram data, and 2 million of those being women. We also know that half of the people who were surveyed ran out of money for food in the month of April. So although lockdown has worked to curb, for instance, the spread of infection, but it's had massive socioeconomic implications for people on the ground and their experiences, and even businesses, right, shutting down, not having income. There's been a true demand and supply shock, which is really unprecedented. And I know everyone says unprecedented during this time, but the financial crisis, for instance, was not the same because we're experiencing a demand and supply shock in a different way than ever before, and therefore businesses are likely to fail because they don't have the demand and because the supply has been constrained. And so it's been a very tricky time, and I feel that the responses to the crisis themselves have been inadequate and haven't been implemented adequately to be able to save those businesses and to save livelihoods. And President Cyril Ramaphosa said that the focus was to save lives and livelihood, and I feel that there's been a failure on the latter. We may have saved lives, but we definitely have not saved livelihoods.
And the strategy that we are employing thus far, are we showing evidence that we're looking beyond the headline unemployment figures, the job changes?
Absolutely. I think the data, I mean, obviously the proof is in the pudding. And I think, again, like you rightly state, that we'll be discussing this for ages about where the true impacts have been, right? For instance, we know that our employment data won't include informal workers. And we also know that Stats SA budget has been cut as a result of the fiscal approach that's being undertaken. So there's also a threat that the data that we need to be able to assess the current moment might not be available because of underfunding to Stats SA. But I think definitely that's something that we'll be looking for over the next couple of months to see what has happened truly within the sectors. As you know, the data really comes at a quarterly level and it lags behind. And so what we know now as facts and the data is actually late. It's not the right figure for the current moment.
I want to talk about the informal sector. It's said that often it serves as a shock absorber to the formal sector, but South Africa has that imbalance of having high unemployment and a very low informal labor sector as well. So what are we seeing during this COVID-19?
I mean, it's really tricky again, like I said. So we're not looking at the informal sector in the same ways that we would under like quote unquote normal conditions, right? The demand and supply shock means that the informal economy itself is also implicated in this current crisis in a different way that we've seen in the past. So again, it's that question of people can't buy, right? People can't go to the shop. So they're not obviously going to be able to buy from informal traders themselves either, right? If informal traders move to go to the city to sell their goods because you need a working permit, of course they're going to be impacted. And so in terms of how we understand the informal economy, this current moment is very tricky because you can't have absorption if the economy itself is constrained on both ends of demand and supply. So we'll have to look at the data as time goes forward.
Would you say that we've even incurred even disproportionately larger losses in the informal sector as a result?
I mean, I don't have those statistics at the top of my head, but I do think that the informal economy, there's been some great wins, particularly with regards to extending the UIF coverage. That's been a great win for some of the informal workers. But I think that the key concerns really for me around the informal economy is that women have been really the net losers in the sector, right? Because they haven't been able to apply for the unemployment grant because some of them are the primary caregivers. And if you're a primary caregiver, in terms of SASSA, you don't qualify for the special COVID grant. So if the special COVID grant had gone to women who are part of the informal economy, who have children, maybe we would have seen different outcomes. But because of the way that structurally women have been at a disadvantage, I worry about those kinds of statistics and their ability to therefore, be able to, for their livelihoods to be protected during this time, given all these various mechanisms that are happening.
So the structural nature of the shock, I'd imagine, would mean that it won't be random, that you'll have certain sectors being more affected than others, that perhaps maybe would you agree, see more women lose jobs as opposed to men?
Absolutely. I mean, we know from the NEET's cram data that out of the 3 million people who've lost jobs, 2 million of them have been women. So we already know that, right? It's a fact. We also know that women are structurally more unemployed than men, right? Like they have a higher rate of unemployment. And so some of these impacts are really gendered in a very direct way. And the question is whether our policy responds to that gendered nature of how the economy is functioning. And our policy, unfortunately, has been quite gender blind. And so it's unable to deliver protection for certain vulnerable groups because by design in itself, it's not aware of it's gender blind. So it's not aware of those issues that are happening, or is aware but is not responding to those issues that impact women differently.
So obviously the president is expected to make various announcements. There's lots of speculations about what it is. Under the circumstances, if we're going to restructure the labour market at this point, the kind of decisions that he makes, will they allow for capital intensity?
I don't know. That I can't give you an answer to right now. I think it's very important that, and in a recent paper that published, it's really about how do we spend to structurally change our economy. We need to think beyond this moment, and we need to think about how do we use this moment to structurally change our economy towards resilience. So it's not just about the current moment, but it's about what does the MTBPS in October look like? So that we do not find ourselves in this position again. We know that capitalization or manufacturing capitalization, productive capacity in South Africa is low. So what is the policy response in this current moment to ensure that the productive capacity is increased over the next couple of months, given the current crisis? So I think we just really need to think differently about the kind of policy responses that we are having in this current moment, and to not think narrowly about, for instance, structural reforms, but how do we structurally transform our economy in the long run? How do we spend in the short run to ensure that in the long run our economy is structurally transformed?
Well, thank you so much for speaking to us.